Welcome to Beyond 2020, a project of the Nebraska Optometric Association. Today we'd like to welcome Dr. Doug Kueker of Vivaic, a learning and consulting company based out of, would you say Lincoln and Columbia, or not Columbia, but Lake Ozark, Missouri?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you for your time tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here is because I was aware of some of the research that you've done in your PhD progress and whatnot. But first of all, you guys are a learning and education design company. So kind of briefly, I know how I would describe it, but how would you describe what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. The common thread is learning and instruction, and how do we use learning and instruction to improve employee performance, student performance, teacher performance, you name it. So depending upon the audience that we're working with, we're helping think through solutions to improve learning outcomes.
Excellent. So I know in your advancement within your PhD program, I know you've done a couple of different research ones, and you have the one published paper that, was that 2 years ago?
Yeah, actually, that paper was published just last April, in the spring. And that one was, part of the research that we did there was on instructional efficiency, specifically looking at how efficient it was to learn from a screencast video on one monitor versus more common, at least in today's professional environment, using kind of two screens and having to kind of toggle back and forth between the video on one and then the application on the other.
So obviously very important in the last year and a half, 2 years, basically, of not only education, but work-life balance and people being at home for their work or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So your study kind of talked about how efficient a person who is trying to accomplish a learning task can be if they are engaged on two screens at the same time and trying to learn on one and put out or output information on the other. Is that a simple way to?
Yeah, that's spot on. What we did was we used eye tracking glasses to be able to measure pupil size, and that was the primary indicator of what we call in my field, cognitive load. So really, how much mental effort is somebody having to put into a particular task? So as they studied the videos, and then also as they did some application tasks, we looked at, how much mental effort are they having to invest through a variety of metrics that looked at what's happening in the eyes.
Well, that's the reason I wanted to have you on here, because a lot of people, when they think about eyes, they think about glasses, they think about contacts. Can I read a chart at the end of the room? And we continually, throughout different guests we've had on here, we kind of talk about the other part of it too, which is how the eyes are working together, coordinating movement, coordinating visual memory, and the things that, especially in a kiddo, are working well, is more of a reflex. It just happens. The brain doesn't have to think about it. Versus, as you mentioned, cognitive load. If it's starting to put a strain on how the brain is responding, then that can impact learning. As far as we can tell. So, what were the results of your?
Yeah, what we found was that individuals in the two-screen condition, so where they were watching a video on one and completing the tasks in the application on the other, that was far less efficient than those who were looking at just the one screen and having to kind of toggle between the video and that application on the same screen. And that was really interesting. I kind of expected it to be the other way around. I expected that it would be a little bit more mental effort invested for getting the same level of performance output on the one screen, but it ended up being that there was more mental effort invested to get the same output on two screens as it was on one.
So the alternative then, trying to do the same task, is that you would be watching the video or the information on the screen, and then you would click to another page to answer the questions or do whatever task was being asked.
And what we found, what was interesting is these were all novice learners. So they were brand new to learning this particular application, that they had some interest in it and such. So all the conditions were just right for this kind of study. But what we found was they actually ended up watching and attending to the video more without going and trying to practice so much. And not that practice is bad, but they watched the video in its entirety and then began kind of trying to teach themselves the different tasks. And so I really think that as we looked back at some of the additional data that we collected as part of that study, that it was really about the fact that they were focused in, laser focused on learning, attending to the content of the video, and then it was much easier for them, so they weren't wrestling with so many different things, and they weren't having to move or shift their gaze so often between multiple pieces of information on the screen.
So in a sense, they almost turned it into a single screen. They just focused on the one and kind of ignored the other. Well, that's really interesting because, I'm sure you see it in your world. Isn't that pretty much where we're all learning nowadays, is on screens? We just don't have as much paper as there used to be.
In instructional videos, launch YouTube and you can find, millions of instructional videos of, teaching you how to do a variety of things on the computer today. And, so that's how we learn today. And much of our learning anymore is self-directed because somebody says, hey, I need a video on XYZ, and we teach ourselves how to do that because maybe we haven't learned that in school and such. And so it's increasingly common to be in those self-directed learning situations and just have to learn on our own.
Yeah, and I think from the eyes side of things, just the things we deal with clinically in the optometry world is, for kids especially, is measuring their ability to have that skill set of shifting gaze, as you were talking about, the ability to converge their eyes to the target and see. As well as then for everybody, one thing that is a bigger issue now is dry eyes when we're working on the computer screen, because your blink rate reduces. So if you're not blinking while you're working on there, your tears evaporate and your eyes start to sting and burn, and so you can't concentrate or focus. You use your laser focus, like you said. And so someday we'll probably also be able to measure efficiency in the workplace based on what we would call visual comfort. So not only the reading aspect, the muscle aspect, but the dryness aspect of things. Just off the cuff, not through your research then, is there any suggestions for efficiency that you would recommend for people that are in that learning world and working on computers?
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the things that there's several studies that demonstrate that pausing, when you're doing an instructional video, finding specific places to pause the video and then actually go and try the particular thing that you were learning about, like test it out on the application and then come back to the video. Not trying to multitask. At the end of the day, the study really demonstrated that we're not good multitaskers, and trying to attend to multiple things at once, it just reduces your efficiency.
So I've got a lot of patients that are coming in now in their workplaces now 3 screens or 4 screens as they're looking around. When it comes to glasses, especially for people when they get into the 45 plus age, their lenses are essentially designed for that reading zone to be down. Well, if you now have 4 screens spread out and they're up high, they're not looking through the reading portion of their glasses anymore. So that adds another distractor to what they're trying to do. And so we always talk about from a vision and eye comfort side of things, our eyes are essentially made to converge when we're looking up close and then drop down. And so people tend to set with their eyes in the middle of their screen as opposed to having the screen actually lower. And so I talk about that with patients all the time. Hey, we need to bring your screen down so that you're looking at the top of the frame, essentially, so that they can work more efficiently as you go through that. So that's all really fascinating in terms of the other worlds that tie into this and how we can be more aware together and help advocate to patients and learners on your end. So within your PhD studies, before you worked on this paper, did you do any other eye tracking metrics that you happened to work in? Or was this the first one where you delved into that?
Yeah, this was my first, foray into working with eye tracking metrics. Most of my work, before had just been on with subjective measures of workload. So, asking the participants to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 how mentally challenging or difficult, a particular task was. And certainly, what we found too in this study, because we also use some subjective measures, is that what you perceive may not always match up with what's actually happening physiologically, like with your eyes and such. So, the body may tell a different story than what you may be thinking.
Sure. So, is there any study out there that shows, let's say this person has a higher cognitive load while they're performing this task versus another participant that's doing the exact same thing, and for whatever reason they're able to tolerate the cognitive load better?
What we know is that experts in a particular field tend to have less cognitive load when they're learning kind of something new in that particular field, because they tend to not be dealing with quite so many new pieces of information, essentially, right? So that's one thing that we know. Another thing that is really interesting is there's going to be load no matter what it is that you're learning, but we kind of think of cognitive load or the mental effort in 3 different ways. So there's extrinsic load. That's load that's kind of distracting to learning. So this 2 screens would be an example of potential extrinsic load. You're basically making the learning more difficult because of some external factor. There's intrinsic load, and that is load that's presented just because of the content that you're trying to learn. So in this study, we were teaching people to use a video production software, and that's it's got a lot of, I don't know if you've ever opened up some of the video production software, there's buttons everywhere, and then trying to figure out, which ones do you use to achieve a certain effect and such. That's intrinsic load, right? Because that's just inherent, complexity in the topic or the subject matter. And then there's also germane load, and that is the load that's positive for learning. Sometimes it's good to struggle a little bit because it helps you, maybe we practice something and you didn't get the result you were looking for, and so you have to go back and rewatch a particular piece, and so that's positive for learning. And so there's quite a bit of research out there right now that just demonstrates that we have to be mindful about what kind of load are we imposing on the students. And in this particular case, the 2 screens was a good example of extrinsic load as opposed to producing kind of that positive load for learning.
Excellent. So to kind of simplify it from a patient side of things is you want to be able to focus as easily as possible without too many extra distractors going on around you. In our world, that would also be making sure that your vision is working as appropriately as possible, whether it's needing glasses or for our binocular vision specialists working on reducing inefficiencies in how a kiddo's eyes are moving or tracking, or even adults. I mean, we used to limit that only to children, but now there's positive results with adults too. So, well, it's all really fascinating. We really appreciate your time here, kind of going over your study and explaining that from a different world of the eyes and the brain and how that all connects.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Doug Kueker, for joining us on this episode of Beyond 2020. I do want to encourage everybody to look for the latest episode of Beyond 2020 at bettereyecarenebraska.com, on the NOA YouTube channel, and all your favorite podcast platforms, and also follow us on Facebook. If you have questions, please contact us at Nebraska Optometric Association. Until next time, thanks for watching and listening.